this knight on e5, controlling the bishop on c on like this bishop's movement so well. This was one of the most intense games I have ever played. It had a theoretical endgame that only had 2 seconds on the clock for that part of the game. It had a very interesting queenless middle game, more positional chess, and I did think I was a little bit in danger in the opening. This is round 5 of the Exton Open, and I am playing someone who is about my same rating, almost exactly. But more importantly, he is the last person who has beaten me who is rated below 2200. So about 25 games ago, I played Ayanch, and I lost to him in a pretty brutal manner. I screwed up an attack really badly, and he got the win. But now I have a rematch. I was playing with the white pieces in that game, but now I have the black pieces against him, and it's time to bring the power to this 9-year-old boy. He's the 7th highest rated 9-year-old boy in the country. So slacking apparently. Okay, so with that being said, the time control is game in 90, delay 10, and I'm going to go through this whole game without a game review, or without the engine until the very end, where I will put it through the game review. So hopefully we all learn something through this process. So let's hop right into it. He plays e4. Now I play the good old Caro-Kann, and he plays a fantasy variation, which is awesome, because I play it. And the positions are always so wacky, always so fun, and very different than many other Caro positions. And the way I like to approach it is queen b6. And this is actually what, I think it was, who was it? It wasn't Mark Hyland. It was a 2100 that I beat back in March. He plays the queen b6 in the fantasy as well. So I also play it, and he makes the natural move, which is knight c3. I trade in the center and play e5. That's the key idea of my approach against the fantasy, is like whenever white has a big center with 2 pawns side by side each other, you really want to diminish that center. I don't know what's the right word, but you usually don't want to allow white to have 2 pawns in the center that are very strong together. You really want to fight back at it, and in this case I do by taking on e4 and then playing e5. And if white takes, this is really great for black. Black is going to develop around these pawns and eventually win them back with bishop e6, knight d7, long castles, and maybe taking on e5 immediately or later, whatever works. So he doesn't take, he continues his development, which is the right way to do it. But now I take on d4 and he takes back with the queen. I don't think I've ever gotten this position in an over-the-board game. I think I've gotten it online a few times, and I'll be honest, I mess up these positions so often. I know the best thing to do is to trade queens here, and I honestly couldn't remember if it was bishop c5 or bishop b4 is better, but then sometimes it's better to go bishop c5, and then after the knight moves, then you go bishop b4, and I was trying to remember it, but I honestly couldn't. And just like white has like, I need to rewind. I need to back up for a second. So looking at this position now, what is the structure here? Well, white has this isolated king's pawn, but white is ahead in development. White has 2 knights out. I got all my boys on the back rank here. So that's no bueno. But long term, this pawn, it can definitely be a huge weakness. And if I can control the square in front of that pawn, I'm in really, really good shape here. That being said, I still have to get out all my pieces. I've lost this position before, or in many fantasy positions like this before, just because I'm not developing my pieces in the right squares, and white gets a lot of development. However, that being said, I know one of the key ideas is that a lot of times black can play bishop e6 and allow white to take on e6, and now black also gets an isolated e-pawn, but usually that's okay, and black can play around it, and it's not a weakness, especially since white has their own isolated king's pawn. So I know that's one of the ideas, and this actually becomes very, very relevant. So I play bishop c5, attacking the knight. If he played bishop e3, I'm not sure what I was going to do. One thing I was considering was knight f6, and preparing knight g4, attacking the bishop, but I don't really think it does anything. So I'm not sure what I would have done. I could also play knight d7 here. This is also definitely a move I could consider. And if he castles, I can go knight here. And this probably is not bad for me. Not 100% sure, though. Instead of that, though, he plays knight b3, which I think is the more natural move. My bishop does control this diagonal really well, but it's hanging right now. I got to figure out what to do. If I play bishop b6, that might be good. He's probably going to go bishop d2 and castle next move. And look how far behind in development I am. Like, I am definitely behind in development here. Maybe he'll play bishop d2. But one of the things I was concerned about is if I develop like knight f6, for example, castles, I think he might be able to play knight a4 here, attacking my bishop. And if I want to keep my dark squared bishop, then, maybe he's going to clamp down on c5 with his knight. Although in this case, I kick out his knight. I'm not sure. There's something I was worried about here. Maybe just simply bishop c4. Maybe move like this, and he's going to put pressure on the half-open f-file. And maybe he'll even try to push his e-pawn forward as well. Not 100% sure what he would do. But I didn't want to go for a position like that. After knight b3, I went bishop b4. Threatening to maybe double his c-pawns here. And maybe if I have knight f6, I can try to take the pawn on e4. Maybe. He played bishop d2. So now if I take him, then he's going to have his bishop on this nice long diagonal here, which I definitely don't want. And yeah, I already thought for a little bit here. I thought for about 4 minutes here on the move bishop e6. I thought about knight d7. And I forgot what I don't like about it. There were some things I didn't like about it. One thing was after castles queenside, knight e5, and let's say a3. I just don't really know what I'm doing here. I can't go bishop a5 because the knight covers that. So, and if I go back to d6, this bishop feels very loose on d6. And if I go back to e7, maybe he can put his bishop on this long diagonal, and I'm gonna have a tougher time castling queenside. Like I ideally want to play bishop e6, but I'm not sure if I can do that here. Like maybe knight c5 in this position, attacking the bishop, can't castle still. But maybe this is okay for me. But I don't like how this b7 pawn is hanging. I'm just very behind in development. But maybe this is okay. Instead, I decide to play bishop e6. So one thing he would have to consider is if he does play a3, what happens if I take his knight on b3? Because if he takes here, now I can take his c2 pawn. So I'm up a pawn in this way. And if he takes back my light squared bishop, well, now he's doubled his b pawns. And now this... So his pawn structure is a bit more weakened, and now I can maybe just go bishop a5 now, since the knight is no longer on b3. And it feels like a success in some regards. I'm still behind in development, but these double pawns and this isolated pawn isn't impressing anyone. And also with the pawn here, it might be harder for him to keep his bishop on c4. Although in this case, he can play b4 with tempo if he wants to. And then play bishop c4, and he can go back to b3 or a2 with his bishop. So maybe he still has easy development here. I suppose so. One thing that he would have to consider with bishop c4, though, is that if knight a4, I can move my bishop and threaten b5. But I don't think it's going to be relevant here. So he does not end up playing a3. Which I thought a3 would be a very testing move. Like, I didn't know how to respond to that. But yeah, he just castles here. He doesn't mess around with a3. And now I just continue development with knight d7, and I'm ready to castle queenside or play knight e7. And I could still consider castling kingside if I want to. I do have options here. Now he plays bishop e2, just developing. Once again, I wasn't sure what I was doing. If a3, most likely still bishop takes b3 here. But now after pawn takes, now I can't take the pawn on c2 is no longer hanging. So I might have to go back here. But even though he has a bishop pair, I do have my let's go bishop on this really nice diagonal, and maybe I can make use of this weakness on e4 long term. Maybe I can play a5, try to open up my rook here. There's different options potentially. Okay, but he plays bishop e2 though, which is natural in the sense that now his rooks are connected, and maybe he's going to try to bring his rook to the open file over here. But like his bishop isn't very good on e2, and it's not very good on d3 either. So this bishop is definitely his worst minor piece for sure. And I was definitely happy to see him play a move like bishop e2 that wasn't forcing, because now I have more time to develop, and I play knight e7. I did have a tough time trying to decide on what to play here, because I kind of wanted to castle. That's what part of me wanted to do, because that's what I was planning to do. But there's something I didn't like about it. I forget what I didn't like about castling. There's something I didn't like. I think it might have had to do with knight d4, attacking the bishop. And if I just develop my knight to e7, and after takes, this pawn looks really hard to defend. Like on e6. Like that just looks extremely difficult to defend. And if I try to defend with knight c5, I'm like, why are my rooks not connected? Why is this knight still on the back rank? And if he takes like this, and I avoid getting the isolated pawn, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, maybe he can play a3, and if I don't take, maybe he can just kick my bishop out, and maybe play a move. Ooh, I don't even know what he wants to do. Like maybe he could play bishop e3, allowing me to double his pawns if he wants to, because now, well, I can develop. Well, maybe this doesn't look that bad for me. I'm not sure what I was scared about. This position doesn't look that bad. Once again, it might have been related to bishop g4, pinning the knight to the king. But in this case, if he does trade off his bishop, then it's hard for him to target this. So maybe this was a totally legit way for me to play too, just castle queenside. This move probably wasn't bad at all. But I decided to play knight e7 though. And I liked my choice because after knight d4, attacking my bishop, I don't try to defend it with knight c5. I just play knight e5. And this knight is absolutely beautiful. It is absolutely untouchable after he trades, after he takes my bishop with his knight. What piece can attack this knight? Not this knight. This knight is 2 diagonal squares away from my knight. So it's going to take this knight at least 4 moves to try to trade off for this knight on e5. And if this bishop ever goes to f4 to try to attack my knight, well, now I can go knight 7 g6, attacking the bishop and defending my own knight. And if he trades, that's great because his dark square bishop was very, very good. And look how beautiful my knight controls the light squares. Like, I just have an octopus knight on e5. like this knight is freaking awesome, and it prevents the white bishop from going on g4 or c4, which would be very useful in targeting my e6 pawn. And it's all because my knight is absolutely beautiful on that square. So even though I give myself an isolated king's pawn just like him, so it's going to be harder for me to target this e4 pawn with my own pawn on this file, I have the half open f file and the half open, or not the half open, the fully open files, the F and D files to work with, and I don't think black has any issues here. That being said, he does play knight a4, and I do tank. Because I really didn't know how to respond to this move, because I thought my pawn on e6 would not be a weakness with my knight on e5 to control the bishop's movement, but now I realize that I cannot stop both the knight from getting in, the threat of the knight from getting in to c5, and the rook from getting to d6, attacking my e6 pawn. I can't deal with both of those threats. So one of my thoughts, so firstly, I think for 10 minutes, I'm trying to figure out what to do. One of my thoughts was a5. So I'm keeping control of c5 with my bishop, and if he trades, now my rook activates on the a file with this open file, and it's very, very nice. But he doesn't have to play like that. He can go knight b6, attacking my rook. And if I go rook a7, that just feels wrong, but maybe it's okay. Maybe he can go. He might be able to go a3 in this position, forcing my bishop out. Although in this case, it doesn't look that bad if I go bishop c5, attacking his knight. So maybe he can go bishop e3 and then go a3 next. Because my bishop is almost out of squares here. So like if I castle, then my bishop is just trapped. And that's not good. And if I go here, maybe he'll put his other rook in the center here. I thought this was worse than it was. I think my rook on... Oh, wait. There's potential discoveries here with the rook. Yeah, I could play a move and if knight g6, for example, I might be able to play knight d5, attacking the rook. And if you take me, I win in exchange. And if you move your rook, I fork you anyways. So yeah, so this rook on a7 is very awkward. Very, very awkward indeed. So I thought about a5, but I thought it looked too awkward after knight b6. I also thought, well, what if I go here? And I'm like, this configuration of pieces looks so loose, but maybe it's okay. But then I realized something. I realized something awesome. That after I trade bishops and play b6 to stop the knight from getting in, he can play rook d6 to attack e6, and I cannot defend it. If I play king f7 to defend the pawn, well, now the other rook gets in and my king is forced away. But then I realize I don't have to defend it. I blunder it. Except your rook's trapped. Got him. Like you're which is crazy. And once again, this knight on e5 controlling the bishop on like this bishop's movement so well. It's absolutely beautiful. Look at this. Look at this geometry here. Got the knight here. Oh man, freaking awesome. So I play knight g6 and he cannot take my pawn, so he doubles up. But now I just have a very pleasant position. This knight is offside. And I just, my king is just going to live in the center. We've traded enough pieces that now my king is safe in the center. And really, like, what is this king even, what if his rook's even doing on this file? This infiltration square is covered by my knight. This one's covered by my rooks. And these pawns are defended. And how is he going to add in another attacker? He can't. He can't. He just simply can't. So what is his plan? He can't even try to control the f-file because his rook on d6 is hanging. So it's really tough to just figure out, like, how do you make progress as white here? And I think you just need to, take one step back to go 2 steps forward and play knight c3. But even after the knight goes to c3, what the heck do you even do? Like, where is this knight going? Is it, like, and ideally, like, maybe you're going to move the bishop and then move the knight and then go to d4 and try to pressure c6 and e6 that way. But that takes a long time to do. Like, let's say if you go knight c3 now, I'm going to go rook here. And if you go bishop f3 to make way for your knight, then I can honestly probably just go knight h4 to attack your bishop. And once again, you can't defend your bishop because your rook on d6 will be hanging. And if you go like bishop h5, for example, what are you doing? Like, I am just going to go rook here, attacking all your pawns. Or I could just take your pawn immediately. Although I would have to worry about rook g1. That much is true. I would have to worry about that. Although in this case, rook g1 again loses the rook on d6. So the fact that this rook on d1 was tied to the defense of the rook on d6 was really, really good. So really, it's really tough to make a move for him. Really, really tough. He decides to play c4. His idea is he wants to soften up these pawns on my queen side. And also, if I allow him, plant this pawn on c5 to support this rook on d6 so I can never get it out. That's one of his ideas. I did consider in this position, after c4, to play rook a d8. And I thought this endgame would be good for me. After he takes, and takes, I thought this endgame is definitely better for me. But why do this? Why go into this endgame when I think my rooks can be better than his rooks? Genuinely. Like, his rooks are staring into an open file, but they're not threatening anything. My rooks can actually create threats. And that's what happens in the game. He rotates his knight back. If he played c5, most likely I would have just ignored it and played rook f2. Because now if he takes, I'm attacking his knight. Also, I could consider just taking his bishop. And if he plays b7, I can go here. And maybe this is a bit more scary than I want, than I like for it to be. At the very least, I can take back on b6, attacking the knight, and then take on a2. And now, maybe he'd play king b1, attacking my rook. But now I can attack his knight. Knight c1, knight c8 check is actually surprisingly annoying. So I definitely would have had to calculate this all out. It's not super easy. Because maybe after c5, I could also consider b5. And the knight is forced out. But once again, this pawn is stuck on c5, which I'm not sure how much I like that. But luckily for me, I guess, he doesn't play c5. He just rotates his knight back. But now I move forward. I play rook f2, attacking his bishop, attacking his pawn. He defends his pawn on g2. But now I play knight h4. And there's really not much you can do here. I could play knight takes f3. But my knight was so beautifully in the center already. And by taking on f3, I do allow him to infiltrate at least a little bit with the move rook d7, because now my knight isn't there to guard that square. And let's say I go forward with the king, or back, whichever one. Let's say I go forward. I do allow his rooks to get in, and this just looks annoying. It probably is still good for me, but I don't want to give him this activity of this unopposed rook on the 7th. So I play knight h4 first, and now he plays c5. But I just take the pawn on g2. And I'm just up a clean pawn. Like, I'm just straight up a clean pawn. It was very difficult for him to move any pieces, and now I'm just up a pawn for it. And life is good. He ends up trading on b6. So now my rook comes alive. This rook has not moved, and spoiler alert, it won't move for even an even longer period of time. But the thing is, it doesn't even need to. It's just vibing on a8, and it has so much potential. It can double on the f file. If this knight moves, the a pawn is hanging. And I can go to a4 in the future if this knight ever moves to attack e4. Like, this rook is living life large, and it is doing so well despite not even moving. And once again, these pawns are defended. This pawn on c6 guarded by my knight, and it's really hard for him to add another attacker on this e6 pawn. So Black is doing very, very well. I'm simply up a pawn here. He plays rook d2, trying to trade off my most active piece, which makes a lot of sense, and there's nothing I can really do about it. I guess I could, if I really want to keep rooks on, I could play rook g4 or something like that, and try to pressure the pawns like this. But I just had to trade. If he's going to spend the time to do it, I'm totally fine with that. And now, how do I progress? How do I progress here? My initial thoughts were like, okay, what are my forcing moves? Like, I could play knight c4 to attack the rook and maybe get in. I could put my rook on the open file maybe. And I could play, I could attack the rook like this. But honestly, my pieces are on great squares. My knight on e5, I literally can't put it on a better square. This rook on a8, godly. It is awesome on the square. So what can I improve? I can try to improve my king, or I can try to take advantage of my pawn side majority on the king side. So I just play g5. Like, I'm just going to get these pawns rolling, and then once you commit your pieces to defend against my pawns, then I'm going to bring my king in. Then I'm going to get my rook in. But I'm going to threaten you first, make a threat with these passed pawns, force you to block it, and then progress with my other pieces. That's the way I decided to proceed. And so he blockades the pawn. I don't know if he had to do that, but it makes sense in the way that, like, it's a forcing move. Now I have to defend my pawn, but in this case, I defend by pushing my pawn forward. And I really thought he was going to play the move h3, because if I take and he plays rook h2, this looks really annoying for me to deal with. And it looks like he's most likely going to win both of these pawns back, or I have to defend passively. So if he did play h3, most likely I would play h5. And if he trades, I'm not unhappy. This passed pawn is still an asset and still hard for him to deal with. And I was going to play king f6, king g5. And, like, how are you going to deal with this, bro? Like, I'm coming for you. I am coming for you. And you have to dedicate more resources to defending it. So after g4, he starts to bring his king in, because now he needs to, at the very least, centralize it, but maybe even use his king to help defend against my kingside pawns. But now I bring my own king forward, and once again, he can't even move his knight because his a pawn would drop. Like, freaking crazy. Like, he really can't move that many of his pieces. He can't even go knight a4 because my rook guards it. So my rook is doing really great work here. And we both move our kings a bit further in the center now. And I can even consider king h4 and king h3, maybe h5, h4, h3. There's different things I could possibly do. If he does go king d4 and try to get into my position, well, the thing is, these pawns that are side by side each other, they do a great job of creating a wall that the king cannot go by. So if he did play the move king d4, I could honestly probably consider either king f4, although I don't like knight d2. I would lose my knight in this position. Oh, but then I can attack both at the same time. Wow. That's crazy. And check here and takes. Like, what? How did my king get past all the white's pieces? That's crazy. But I'm gonna lose a lot of pawns here, so this looks very drawish, or winning for white. So if king here, I can play knight f3 check, and the king cannot go forward into my position anymore. And if he goes king c4, now his king feels really off center here. I could consider knight d8, or not knight d8, rook d8. And if he plays a move like knight e4 to try to attack my pawn, I can fork him. And if he moves his knight elsewhere, I don't know what I would have done. At the bare minimum, I can play rook d2, attacking his pawns. And if he moves to defend, well, my rook is guarded by my knight. So very, very tough for him to make progress here. But he does end up playing b3, a sensible move. Now his rook defends his a pawn laterally, and now he can move his knight and potentially reroute it. I end up going in the tank after this move. I think for about 10 minutes, 11 minutes, on the move rook d8. And another idea behind b3 is it also allows the knight to go to a4. So one thing I could do is play b5. But I didn't like knight d2, and let's say I play a move like h5, knight f4, attacking e6, and I was like, it's kind of actually hard for me to defend my pawn now. It's not so easy. If I go king f6, when I lose the pawn on h5, if I go rook e8, this rook is so passive this rook is passive, not massive. Like it is just passively defending here, and I still like the look of it. I like the look of it. That being said, maybe this isn't so bad. Like, how is he going to improve his position even more? Maybe the move h3. But maybe I shouldn't be worried about that move at all. Maybe I can play knight f3 and then play e5 and try to kick his knight out of my position. Like, maybe that's the best way to play. So maybe I shouldn't be worried about it. Instead, though, I play rook d8 instead of b5. Because I thought it was very active and I can get my king into the position even more and force his king back. And I don't care about losing the b6 pawn. This ended up being a horrible mistake in the way that I think I just lose my advantage just straight up. And I just don't know. I'm honestly just not sure. Firstly, if he makes a lazy move like a4, then oops, you lost your knight. Defended by my knight. So my rook's defended by my knight, and I attack his knight. But he played knight a4. But my deal was, I calculated that after rook d3 check, king e2, king f4, he can take my pawn. I take his pawn in the center, and he can play knight c4, a very tricky move. But well, a very tricky move because firstly, my pieces are a bit loose here. If I play h5 to defend my pawn on g4, well, firstly, if I take his knight on c4, then he throws in this in-between move. So it's a check, and I'm forced to move back with the king. Then he can take my rook, and after I take his rook, he takes my knight, and he is probably winning in this position. I actually don't know, to be honest. Like, maybe, I guess I start pushing my pawn first, but I thought maybe king e3, and if, oh, but maybe this is okay for me, actually, because king f3, and if a4, then I just start rolling my pawn down, and, oh wait, maybe this is winning for me. a4, e4, yeah, this is great for me. I shepherd my pawn to victory here with checks. And if he doesn't move his king back to try to blockade the pawn, and just goes a4 immediately, oh, we both promote. Okay. We both promote, which is not good for me if I want to win. Yeah, not good for me if I want to win. So I'm glad I did not play that then. I'm glad I did not play that. But after knight c4, if I play a move like h5, then after knight takes, my rook is hanging on d3. And, like, my king is overloaded. I can't defend both my knight and my rook at the same time. So I have to be very, very careful. But after knight c4, I calculated rook d4. So from this position, I was calculating all of this stuff after rook d8. And I decided that after all of this happens, I play rook d4, and I think I'm better. That was my conclusion. I'm still up a pawn. He has this passed a pawn, but I think my pieces that are all centralized, they're worth more than this passed a pawn. I thought he might consider playing knight d2, not trading knights, and I have to bring my king back, and I'd probably push my pawns here, and if he plays a4 now, I'm not worried about it. I can always bring my maybe my pawn forward and then my knight back to defend, or I can push h4 now, and if a5, if he keeps pushing his pawn, then it's going to be too hard for him to defend. Or maybe I can play a move like king f6 or king f4 here. Actually, in this position, I can play king f4, and then if a4, h5, and I might be able to play knight f3 here in the first place, maybe attacking this knight, but then he can move his knight back maybe, so maybe it's not super easy at all. Yeah, maybe it's not super easy. Yeah, I play rook d4, but he does end up trading his knight for my knight, and now we're just in a pure rook endgame, and he plays it simply. Well, he plays king e3. He blitzes out king e3. I thought I would be fine if he pushes his pawn. I'm going to push my pawn to defend g4 so my rook isn't tied down to it. And then if he continues pushing, I can play rook b4 maybe. And if you defend the pawn on b3, then I can play c5. And if you push the pawn, now I can play rook b6, and you can't defend the pawn. If you play a7, I just go here. And if you go rook c3 to attack my pawn, I just defend. And if you go check, maybe I can just go here, but then, and go like this. This is probably the way I have to defend. And yeah, this is good for me. This is very good for me. I wasn't worried about him pushing his a-pawn immediately. But he plays king e3, which was very interesting. And I decide to play rook e4 check. One of my thoughts was to go rook b4 immediately, because now it's really hard for him to push a4 because his b-pawn will be hanging with check. But I wasn't really sure what to think about it. He could play rook b2 to prepare a3, kicking my rook out with tempo. And I was like, is this really what I want? I'm not so sure. I could play h5, but then a3, and then I could go, if I go rook check, maybe this is the way to go, but I'm just not sure about it. We can go b4 as well. I'm not sure. This is probably not bad for me, although very, very scary with these passed pawns rolling so quickly. But I ended up playing rook e4 check because I wanted him to commit his king. If he goes king d3, which is what he does in the game, now I'm going to go rook f4. And at this point, after rook f4, I have 20 minutes left, and he has about 40 minutes. So he has more than double my time. Well, no, not more than double. He has double my time. And this position is still complicated, and black can still lose this for sure. And he ends up pushing a4 now. He's saying, hey, I have this passed pawn. I'm just going to push it and just keep pushing it. But I have an idea, and that's to play king d5. I move my king this way now. So I do wonder, actually, instead of playing rook e4 check, maybe I could have played rook f4 immediately, because now if a4, then rook check here, and his king cannot defend b3. But I probably don't want to trade off my pawns, because if we trade too many pawns, this endgame is going to be a draw. So I probably want to defend, but maybe I could just play h5, and after a4, rook f3, because now he has to move his king voluntarily. Although it kind of just transposes into what happens in the game at this point. Not super sure what I would do. But anyways, point is, I move my king over, because now my king opposes the white king, and now this rook f3 check forces the king back to the second rank. And if you go king c3, well, that's great, because I'm just going to keep moving my king as well. And now it looks a little bit scary here, but I think I'm probably fine. I can go rook check here, and maybe king d6 or king d5. Rook check, maybe here. Not sure. I'm not sure how I would progress. He could also play b4 as well. Oh no, in this case I just take. Yeah, that's no good for him. I wasn't worried about him moving his king more, but he does push to a5. He has a passed pawn, might as well push it. And my idea is, I'm going to use my rook to blockade the pawn and use my extra pawns to my advantage. I have this 2-on-1 that I can turn into a passed pawn, and I have this 1-on-0 that I can start pushing down the board too. So I go check, I play h5, and I allow him to keep pushing. He could have just played a6 here, but I was not scared. I think I would have even played rook f7 immediately, or played e5 first, allowed a7, so then I would go rook f8. I think I would have stopped the pawn immediately though, and not played e5, and yeah, you probably would have to king c3, rook here, and now I'm going to start pushing my pawns. I could even consider c5 to block out the king from the b4 square, but then maybe he could play either rook check and then give up this pawn for this pawn, or maybe he could play b4, and if I take, then his king is going to get in slowly but surely. But in this case, I should have enough counterplay. Like I could play e5, and maybe this is losing. Maybe in this case it's losing. I could consider king c5. But then this rook kind of gets in, and that's a little bit annoying. Maybe I can go rook check, and after king back, king b6. Then rook takes. Oh, but now I have check and takes, and I have those two connected passers. This is probably good for me. This is probably winning. But still complicated. Still complicated. But he goes here first. And the idea is he wants to stop my king. So one thing I could also do here is that actually my king is not close enough to stop the pawn. My king is within the square, but because my pawn is on c6, I can't actually stop the pawn. So after a6, to be in the square, I have to put my king on c6 to stop the pawn, but now I can't. So I'm not sure why he didn't just push his pawn first. But attacking this pawn with e6 is interesting, because his idea is, like, one idea is, oh, what if I try to move my king closer? So if pawn takes, then king b5, I don't have to worry about this passed pawn. But the issue is if king c5, then rook e5 check, and I have to move my king away from this pawn. So let's say to d6, for example. Well, now I'm going to lose my extra pawn on the king side, and this is much, much closer to a draw now, if not losing for black. So I end up pushing my pawn because he has no threats. I also thought about c5 as another potential move, but I didn't see the point of pushing this pawn when I can start pushing this passed pawn instead. And this one tempo actually becomes a huge, huge difference. Every tempo matters in this rook and pawn endgame, especially when at any point our rooks can get traded off and it's a pawn endgame, and it's, whose passed pawns are quicker is the question. Anyways, so he puts rook e2. I push my pawn to e5. And if he doesn't push his a pawn, I'm just gonna start rolling this pawn down. Like, why not? Why not? Like, for example, if he just moves his king to b2, I'm gonna play e4, and if he just continues shuffling his king, then I'm gonna play king e5, and I'm going to move my rook back, play king f4 and king f3, and I'm gonna get these boys rolling. I'm gonna get them rolling down the board. His king is too far away. And if he moves his king over to also block the pawns, then my rook can do his best Pac-Man impression. Waka waka waka. So yeah, it's gonna be good. But he does start pushing his a pawn, and I do decide to stop it with rook f7 here. Like I said, I was thinking about just pushing my pawn one more time and allowing the pawn to get to a7. That might be better than what I did in the game. Maybe. I wasn't sure. And I forget why. I think I like the option of, like, being able to sometimes get my rook out of the corner. Okay, like, for example, like king c3, rook here, rook here. I like the option of sometimes having my rook get back out of the corner and him not promoting. But I probably should have waited for the pawn to go to a7 and then start moving my king forward. Like, I think this variation is winning for me, probably, because his king has to go one step further. So maybe I can play king. Maybe I can play c5, blocking everything out. And if he gives me a check, then I'm happy because my king gets in, and I'm gonna roll my pawns down the board. And if he plays b4, I'm also happy because now I'm gonna play king d4, and it's just gonna be an absolute race here. Maybe, yeah, probably king d3 in this position, and here then I can take and play here, and yeah, this is just resignable. He can play check, check. Oh, whoops. And like here, and I'm just gonna get my king like this and do this, and I'm gonna win the 2-on-1. His king's on the opposite side of the board. So I think this is the right way I had to play. I think I had to wait, push my pawn another time to e4, and then put my rook on f8 to a8. But there's some tactics with a pawn on a7, like, you know, like if this king was on c3 already, then like maybe he could play a move. He could play some janky stuff like rook f2, because I cannot take his rook or else he promotes. Yeah, like even this position, for example. Let's say I go here, but then rook f7, and he's activated his rook. Like, this looks really annoying. So maybe it's good that I didn't allow the pawn to get to f7, because I allow weird stuff like that, like rook f2 tactics in some positions, maybe. But yeah, I end up stopping the pawn on the 7th rank instead of the 8th rank, and he gives me a check, which I think was a mistake, because now he's forcing my king to go forward where it already wants to be. And now he brings his king forward so that he can meet rook a7 with rook a2. But now my king continues to go forward here. If he had just gone king c3 immediately, then rook a7, rook a2. Now I have to invest another tempo into getting my king closer. But I think what he liked the idea of forcing my king away with that rook check so that he can bring his king in more easily. Because in this position, I can probably just stop him from advancing with the move king c5. And even if he plays b4 check, then I'm going to win this pawn on a6. But in this case, maybe he shouldn't be worried about that, because he gets counterplay. Like maybe king takes, and rook a6 maybe. Rook a6. And this might still be winning for me, but it is definitely tougher. He can probably lock down my king with a move like rook c5 and start bringing his own king in. Although in this case, I might have a move like h4, but then rook here. I'm not 100% sure. I could also consider a move like king c5, and if king e4. No, I like this for him. I think this is very close to a draw. So I think he made another mistake here, and he's playing very, very fast. I mean, at this point, after rook d2 check, at this point, he still has 34 minutes. Freaking insane. I have 3 minutes. I might have 5 minutes at this point, and I think down to 3 minutes soon. But I end up committing my king to e4, because after we both put our rooks in the a file, well, now I bring my king to f3, and I fully commit. I fully commit here, and I actually think this game should have been a draw, because after he moves his king, I start pushing my pawns. I think he just needs to take the pawn on c6, and now after I go to e2, he can go king b6, attacking my rook. And if I take him... Wait, what was the variation? Because maybe he could take and then play king here. And then I have to sacrifice my rook and play h4. And in this case... Oh, this should still be winning for me. Wait, for some reason I thought this pawn endgame was... I thought this was a draw at some point. I don't remember why. Oh, I feel a lot better about this game now. I thought he messed up, but I guess no matter what he does, he's losing. Because in the game, he actually plays king b6. That's the move he decides to do, attacking my rook. But now I play e2, and if he takes, I'm just gonna take, and after take with the check, take his pawn with the check. And now we trade rooks, but my pawn is still on c6. So I have plenty of time because he has to go win my pawn. And in the other variation, he had already won my pawn. And I queen eons before he does. So I have plenty of time. But I guess in my 3 minutes, I couldn't calculate it out. So I thought king b6 was losing and king c6 was drawing. But I think they're both losing for him. So he realizes that. Plays rook a1, but now I take on a2, on a6 anyways, and now I'm just, my pawns are going to get there before he does by just one move here, because after everything, I promote, and then I play g3 here, and he takes with his pawn. I actually was considering going h3 because I promote with a check. I was actually thinking about doing it like that, but I realized that I promote one move before he does. And if you know anything about these endings, if this pawn was if this was a bishop's pawn or a rook's pawn, so an A, C, F, or H pawn, this position would be a draw. But because it's a knight's pawn, it's winning for black because there are no stalemate traps. With a pawn on C7 or F7, there are some stalemate traps. Same thing with the rook pawn, but or stalemate ideas, I should say. There's some stalemate ideas. In this case, there are no stalemate ideas. So I just have to keep checking him. And mind you, at this point, I have literally 6 seconds. So we like, it's an absolute plethora of moves. We're both moving fast here, and I end up getting his king in front of his pawn. I move my king. Then I have to restart the whole process again. I get his king in front of his pawn. Yeah, this pattern is very important to recognize, where the queen is 2 squares away from the king, and it's touching the pawn, and the king has to go in front of a pawn, in front of his own pawn to guard his pawn. So, but that, once again, that allows me to get my king in, and now I'm pinning, and I keep bringing my king closer, slowly but surely. I bring my king up, and finally, king g6, and he resigns because his only legal move is king c8, and is simply checkmate. Absolutely crazy ending. I mean, these last sequence of moves, it was an 80-move barn burner. Like, firstly, this opening, really tense here. I was really worried that I was progressing in the wrong way, but I think I found all the right moves here. I think castling or knight e7, they're both good here. I allow him to take on e6, and giving me an isolated king's pawn, but I correctly evaluate that he cannot take on e6 after I move my knight, and I just have a very pleasant game with these knights, man. These knights in your face, and I just get my rook in, and it's just very simple play from there. I win a pawn, and I kind of I don't progress in the best way. I'm very proud of myself for realizing, hey, my knight's really well placed, my rook's really well placed. Let me improve my pawns and then my pieces afterwards. I'm very proud of that mature decision. Like, maybe if, maybe in some other cases I might be like, oh, knight c4, I should get my knight in. No. Push your pawns and then bring your pieces in. And I think I played this really well. I'm not convinced that rook d8 is that bad, but yeah, maybe b5 is just better, trying to limit his counterplay that way. I just didn't like knight e2, and after something like rook d8, he could play knight knight f4, attacking this pawn, and I just didn't like the look of this. But maybe once again, I play h5, play knight g6, try to force his knight out. I'm not sure. I'm not sure at all. But maybe that's what I try to do. But instead, I go for this maneuver. I get my king active, and I think this is good for me. I think this is good for me. Watch the computer say it was a draw throughout. I don't know. But I think I did a really good job of creating chances for myself, and yeah, winning this complicated broken pawn endgame. So that was the game. And with this tournament, I think I have gone probably 26 games, not losing to anyone below 2200, and I'm happy I got revenge against Ayansh because he beat me back at the PA State Championship. So feels good to get revenge, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm gonna hit the game review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.